Hi friends, this is Marilyn from tarotclarity.com, and today I'm finally doing a video on the Sola Busca. Now, obviously I've been aware of the Sola Busca for decades, but I've never done a video on the Sola Busca other than to compare the two Sola Busca decks that I happen to own. But other than that, I have not jumped down the Sola Busca rabbit hole in any video form. The reason for that is because once I purchased the Sola Busca and I did my periphery study on it, I realized that, as everybody else, is that it's quite unlike any other tarot deck. And I don't relate to the cards. I didn't understand what the cards were. They are numbered. And the one deck that I have of the Sola Busca was one that was published in 1995, I think, by Lo Scarabeo. Now, it's not a facsimile deck, but it's a recreation, cleaning up the images. It's relatively faithful. I've compared it now to another Lo Scarabeo deck, which is more of a facsimile, and there are some little differences, but for the most part this deck clarifies what we're looking at in the event that the other deck is a little vague. I missed out on the Meyer deck that came out, regrettably, which I think is supposed to be the most faithful of all the Sola Busca decks. At any rate, the illuminating ancient tarots, which was the first Sola Busca I bought, gives us a cheat sheet, and it gives us the numbers and the cards that they relate to. Now, because the Sola Busca cards were indeed numbered, the original publication, I think, clearly misappropriated numbers to the images that appeared on the cards. So, for example, let's see, they have one so they assigned the number 16 card the meaning of the what we would call the tower card. So for 16, the cheat sheet says arrogance, pride, catastrophe, chaos. So let's look at the 16th card. If I can find it, hold on. Okay, so the number 16th card, if you really look at it, is named Olivo, or Olivo, or I think Olivo probably, if we're trying to go for the Latin or Italian pronunciation. And it clearly has an image of the sun in the picture. Now, I would imagine that Olivo is probably a reference to an olive branch or an olive tree. And then we have the sun. So I think it's really unlikely, no matter, the rabbit hole that I'd have to jump into to find out what the meaning of Olivo was, it intended to be, because I don't know my Latin and I don't know references from the late 1400s. This deck is pinpointed at being created maybe around 1490 and then painted by 1491, but by 1491 this deck was created. But I don't get a sense that this card means catastrophe. If anything, the reference is to an olive branch, or something like that. So it seems peaceful. And then we have the sun there. So, So for these reasons, I never really subscribed to using the Sola Busca for divinatory purposes, or I use that term in the loosest sense. I haven't used the cards for guidance, because I'm not intimately familiar with the intention of what these original cards in their particular sequence meant. Okay, now I'm getting ahead of myself. For those of you who have watched my last few videos, about 3 videos ago, I did a video on the alphabet and how it connects to spells. I used the rabbit hole of the alphabet to guide me into talking about spells and the power of words and the power of sounds right? And then the next video I did after that was on runes, because I showcased, oh, in that same original video, I also discussed the Nordic runes. I did discuss both our alphabet and the Futhark alphabet. And I will link that down below. Now, the following video that I did on a segue to the Artisan Tarot deck called the Witch's Runes, which is a little bit different. But I just used my alphabet as a segue into their deck, which is a rune deck. As a result, one of my subscribers, Patrick Otime 4578, commented and mentioned that Nimrod appears in the Sola Busca. And Nimrod, very interestingly, had been a word that I had just been reading about or learning about or thinking about as a result of my jump into the alphabet and the sounds and spells. I promise you I'm going to make a good point. I think you'll be very interested. If you're willing to hang in there, I think it'll be worth your while. Now, when I was preparing for and when I was involved in creating my alphabet video, I became aware, and I've been, listening to a few YouTube individuals who are keen on the history and the origin of words. And two of the YouTubers that I've been following are, the name of their channel is Rob Words, and he has another channel in collaboration with a woman named Jess Zafaris, and their collaborative video channel is called Words Unraveled, and I'll connect their links down below. Rob Words' real name is Rob Watts, but he has his own channel, and then he has a channel with this other woman. And at any rate, one of the videos I watched from them had to do with curse words or insult words, not necessarily curse words, but words we use to, insult people. And Nimrod was among one of those words. So I had just came upon Nimrod in my organic rabbit hole. And then within just a few days, Patrika Time 4578 writes me and reminds me that Nimrod appears in the Sola Busca, the Sola Busca canon. So I was like, it's time to revisit the Sola Busca. So I pull out my 2 copies of the Sola Busca. As I mentioned, I think they're both publications by Lo Scarabeo. One is from the Anima Antiqua series, and the other one was just one that they published in 95 or something like that. So I find the Nimrod card, which is not number 16, but number 20, and it clearly has an image, has the name Nimrod, or whatever it was, however it was written in Latin, and an individual protecting himself or shielding himself or responding to a flash coming from the heavens, which is toppling, I don't know if it's really a tower, but the top of something, could be the top of a column or something like that. So clearly this seems to be a reference to the tower and not a reference to the number 16 card, Olivo, which, if anything, suggests peace, right? Or suggests the sun or something, but something that seems maybe a little more positive than what this one would suggest. However, I'm not sure if I mentioned this earlier in this same video or not, but the number 16 card, Lo Scarabeo kind of went along with the order of the cards and designated Olivo with catastrophe, whereas really it seems clear to me that the Nimrod card is the card that really connects with the tower. And to their credit, by the time they did their Anima Antiqua series, they no longer committed to giving meanings to any of the cards. So when they finally just published this little handy dandy book, they just indicate the name of the card and the number it's assigned to. But they don't give us any divinatory meanings like they did in the earlier deck, where they just applied whatever 16 was, they said it was the tower. But it's just not, which is why probably why a lot of people never used it, because it just doesn't make sense, And unless you're intimately aware of the Roman history of the Roman story, or with Renaissance and medieval alchemy, and you're probably, a lot of what it appears on the Sola Busca will be lost and has been lost on me. So when I saw Nimrod, I thought, okay, well, it's number 20. That's clearly a reference in my mind to the tower. So if I go with the thought, vanity comes before the fall, what is the 19th card? If this is the ruin, right, of vanity, who was Nimrod, or Nambroto, who was he? Well, he was the king who happened to be the king of, I guess, what is now Babylon, right, the town of Babel. And he was full of hubris, I imagine, and he wanted to create a skyscraper to make his mark on the world. And so he created the Tower of Babel. And I know that Nimrod was the great-grandson of Noah, so maybe there was a sense of, I'm going to build a tower so tall that if God floods the planet again, we'll beat the system, kind of thing. So there was maybe a certain amount of hubris. I don't know if that's true or not. I'm just kind of putting my own thought process in there. So if he was thinking, I'm going to build a tower so tall that we can't drown again, yeah, I might have pissed God off, which is, I don't know if the Bible ever gives us a reason why it annoyed him that they were building a tower to the heavens, but God just put a kibosh to the whole thing, and by striking the tower in that fell swoop, everybody started speaking different languages, because up until that time everybody was speaking the same language, and by creating different languages they no longer could communicate with one another, and they no longer could cooperate in building this thing that offended God. At any rate, so I went and I looked at the number 19 card in the Sola Busca, and it's called Sabino. Now, Sabino is an image of a man with a crown, holding a helmet that kind of reminds one of the Nautilus. So when I did a little research on what Sabino could have meant, because it doesn't look like a devil to me, so there goes my theory about vanity coming before the fall, particularly in this deck. It turns out that Nero, who is card number 8, or Neron, who is card number 8, is a reference to Nero, who was a cruel and deranged, kind of crazy kind of individual, and in Roman history. And he castrated a child and created and made that child his wife, who he named, I think, Sabino, or something, or some derivative of Sabino. And the name Sabino is a reference also to his wife, who he ended her life by kicking her while she was pregnant, and her name was Poppaea Sabina. So now this is the number 8 card. So it doesn't come in sequence with the Nimrod, and it doesn't make, excuse me, I'm looking for Sabino. Well, that Sabino is the card that came before the tower, okay? So Sabino now is the I guess the adult version of the child that he castrated to marry But this doesn't look like a, I don't know. I mean, it doesn't kind of make sense. It doesn't make sense. But in this card, when we see, we see evil, right? So I think, okay, could that be the devil card? But I don't think so. It doesn't, if anything, there's like a reference, like almost like a reference to madness. Like you can almost see a reference to madness, like in The Fool, because Nero was obviously nuts, So we do see an indicator that it could reference being crazy. But once you have that thought, you're reminded of the number 0 card, which they named Mato, who also has those same things. But this one is clearly designated for the Fool. They gave it the 0. They gave it 0, and they call it Mato. So then I thought, okay, well maybe Nerone is representing the devil or evil. So then I thought, well, let me go through the cards and see if there's any other card that could represent the devil or evil. Now, many times, if you've been with me long enough, you'll hear me say, I'll point out the virtue cards in the deck, and I'll say, these are the wings of virtue. So justice often has wings. It's a virtuous card. Or the temperance card, the angel has wings. It's a card of virtue, right? But when I get to the devil, I'll often say, well, the devil has wings, but those are not wings of virtue. They're bat-like wings. So I was kind of looking for that in this canon of 21 cards, or 22 cards. And what card has bat wings? But Ipeo. Now, Ipeo, I think when I looked up what Ipeo could mean in modern day English, and probably a lot has gotten lost in translation, I think it means hype. I'm not sure what it suggested back in those days, but he definitely has bat wings, and he's only one. The other wings that appear in the canon of figures are like wings of Mercury on the feet. There might be some wings on a helmet or something like that. But these are the only ones that decidedly look like bat wings. And so I thought, I wonder if this is supposed to be the devil, and it's the number 17 card, and it comes after 16. So it comes still comes before Nimrod, who's number 20, but not right before Nimrod because it's 17. So there's still cards between this card, if it's the devil, and the tower. And we see again these things, if they're bells or beads. We see praying hands. We see another winged creature, like an angel, that this guy is praying to. Now, unlike the devil, who appears frequently with misshapen feet, he doesn't have misshapen feet at all. And I wonder if this symbol, if this twist of the belt could be a symbol for something, We also get a sense of like Saturnalia, which I think is like the hermit card, represents like going into a dark season or, passage of time. And this kind of suggests that too, because we have the sense of the hermit in the passage of time, or because he's got wings, but they're not the wings of virtue, So could this be the devil? We don't know what his shield says. And he's older, in the facsimile card, we see that he's got white hair and beard, clearly white, right? So he's aged. So is it like a reference to Kronos? you know. Now this is like one of the older decks, you know. I mean, it's not as old as the Visconti Sforces or the Charles VI or the, you know, it's improperly called Charles VI. I call it the Estensi, but it's been packaged as the Charles VI. So this deck is not as old as those decks, but it's pretty old, you know. And if we look at the decks like the Rosenwald and the Sola Busca, excuse me, the Rosenwald and the Budapest, excuse me, we do have Devil and we do have Tower, and particularly in the Budapest, they are sequenced in the order we're familiar with. We have, well, they don't have the same numbers, but they're sequenced in the same chronological, but one comes after the other, 14 and 15, rather than 15 and 16. But we have the Devil and the Tower that are in that order. So certainly by the time the Sola Busca came around, they would have been aware of the trend of putting the Devil before the Tower, but they didn't do that if in fact Ipeo is the Devil and Nimrod is the Tower. I mean, these cards are really crazy. You know, the Sola Busca cards, they're nuts. So much so that it's kind of making me nuts, because I decided, okay, I never took Latin in high school or college, unfortunately. So the best I can do is use my Google Translate with Latin into English, which leaves a lot to be desired. And then I try to do Google searches on who these characters may have been in Roman history, you know, which also leaves a lot to be desired. But I did come up with a few connections. That's what some of these cards might really be representing. Like we have one called Postumio. Let me see if I can find it. So, you know, going by my own assumption, like, because we see the skull, Postumio kind of makes me think of posthumous, right? Posthumously, when something happens after death. And we have like the suggestion of death. We don't see the individual. So is this the death card? Or is this a card that means after death? And it's low in the sequence, it's number 2. But I would never associate this with the female pope, ever, you know. Let's see, any others? You know, so I thought, well, maybe that was, you know, maybe that was the death card, Postumio. But then I thought, well, let me go look at the 13th card, because if any card's going to stick to, you know, a number sequence, it's probably the death card. It's probably going to stick to 13. So I went to look at 13, and we have Catone, which I don't know, could that mean catatonic? Can that be the root for catatonic? And when I picked the 13th card, we have an image, certainly, clearly, of someone's demise. Now, I'm not sure. Poreatus. I'm not sure exactly what's written on the scroll here. And I don't have any conclusive books on the Sola Busca, which I should get. I mean, I'm just winging this. I'm just like doing my own observations. So it leaves, you know, something to be desired, I'm sure. But here we definitely, is that death? It also has a star. You'll notice a star. So there is a reference to a star there. And it's number 13. And then we clearly have a reference to Bacchus, which I think is interesting, because I think Baccho, you know, when I was just looking up the names, it seems like it is a reference to Bacchus. And he does look like an individual who's disheveled. Interestingly, he does seem to have an atypical foot or a stump that has toes on it. Which, interestingly, the devil has unusual feet, right? So could this have been the intent for the devil? 14, card number 14. It still doesn't come before 20, which is the Nimrod card. And the Bacchus card, often in the Swiss decks, it seemed to be replacing the Pope, right? The male spiritual card, it's like the card of debauchery. So I think the Sola Busca was definitely, the people who created the Sola Busca deck, the family, was definitely aware of the typical tarot deck. Clearly, there are some references to it. And, but I think they just decided to create their own deck. Maybe they were really into, the history of Rome. Maybe, they believed that they were part of the lineage. I'm not familiar enough with them. I'd have to go down another rabbit hole. But maybe they was a sense of their birthright, that the deck represents, a lineage for themselves. I don't know. And it seems like some of the cards overlap because we have, like I mentioned, this could be the wings of not virtue. So this could represent the devil, but it could also be reminiscent of the hermit, of the old man, or passage of time, So it seems that some clearly overlap and make reference to one another, like Nimrod makes reference to the fool. They're both mad. But in case we got confused and thought that this was the fool card, they identified the fool card with motto. So it's a fascinating deck. It's real. And this card, Metello, number 15, kind of reminds me, just by looking at it, of, like the emperor, right? He's got an orb. Let's see, does he have an orb? Yeah, there's an orb up here. He's sitting in profile. He's got a shield. Not really sure what's on the shield. I think I read something that I think it was a reference to when Venice, or the area, was established, something like that. But I don't know. Could it be the emperor? And they just gave it a sequence that we're not familiar with. The 21st card, I think looks like the world to me. And then here, I have a couple more I want to mention. The Lentulo card. Could this have, and this is card 18. I'm wondering if they intended this to be the hermit. He's, again, an older guy. He's hunched over, which a lot of the older decks had a hunched over kind of guy for the hermit. I mean, sometimes he was called the hunchback. So kind of reminiscent of that. And he's got a torch, which we saw later replacing the hourglass in the French decks, right? We see a torch or a lantern in the French decks. And Lentulo, I think, means slow or slowly when I did a translation. So it could mean, the passage of time. He's not wearing his helmet or his hat or his crown or whatever it is. So he may be past his prime. And then Carbone, let me see if I can find both cards. Like the word carbone, which I guess could mean like charcoal or carbon, which suggests darkness. And then we see the moon. And this is the number 12 card. So to me, that this suggests nighttime. But then look, we have those things again, right? And is he walking with the assistance of a stick? Or is that, what is that? We can't see the top and we can't really see the bottom of it. So this is such a, so it looks like we have the sun, the moon, and a star, right? We have Olivo that has the sun. We have Carbone, which has the moon. And then we had one that looked like it had a star to me. Sorry for putting you through this. Here it is. Catone. I mean, that looks like the most starish card in the deck. So if they were familiar with the cards of the typical tarot canon, then they would have known that the moon, the star, and the sun were represented. And these 3 cards have the moon, the sun, and what looks like a star, but they don't seem to. Why would the star card be represented this way? Now, Mark Adams, a number of years ago, came out with the idea that it was a grimoire, like of spells against enemies of the people at that time. I'm not saying that it couldn't have been, but I'm not entirely convinced that that's what it is. It's just a very unusual deck, and the Sola Busca does step to the beat of its own drum, and really fascinating. And this is the first time I've really taken a look at really trying to figure stuff out and trying to make connections, because when I just went with the original cheat sheet of the force fit of number 1 means this, number 2 means this, putting it in our current day understanding, it never made sense, and I didn't understand or didn't take the time to look up or reference who these Roman individuals might have been until recently, as a result of the rabbit hole I went down when I did my spelled video. And and then I watched the video on insult words that rob words, and I want to give them credit, and I will put their link below. Rob Words video and Words Unraveled, in his collaboration with Just Zephyros, whereby I learned like some Latin words that took me down the rabbit hole for Nimrod, which then my viewer, my subscriber Patrico Time, reminded me that Nimrod, that I just learned about in the videos for words and in history and the origin of words, reminded me was in the Sola Busca. And that seems to clearly represent the Tower card, which I had just done a video on. So you see, organic learning is the best kind of learning. It's really because and there are coincidences, because the Tower in the sequence that I did the other videos on the alphabet is just a coincidence. And yet it fits perfectly because it gelled. Nimrod referencing the Tower. I just learned the history of Nimrod, and then my viewer reminded me of Nimrod being in the Sola Busca. So, organic learning is the best kind of learning. At any rate, I'm probably going to be spending some time on the Sola Busca. This is just my first video ever on the Sola Busca, aside from comparing 2 Sola Busca decks, But interesting stuff. And I'm really curious about what was going on in their heads when they created this deck. because this might be the kind of deck where you really had to be there. You really had to be there to really know what was going on. But I wasn't there, but I'm fascinated. Until next time, friends, peace. Stay well, be kind, and do no harm.